So I thought I would begin with this chapter that's titled Displaced, It's Always About the Land. And every chapter in this book begins with an epigraph, and this one is from Jean Tallé's book, The Northwest is My Mother. The Métis were not Indian enough to be acknowledged as having land rights, and they were too Indian to benefit from any policy other than slum clearance. One thing was certain: they were not wanted in the city. And they're speaking of the city I grew up in, Winnipeg. My parents seemed to always have so many decisions to make, and all the important discussions took place at the kitchen table. Children were not included, but I was nosy, so I would sometimes hang around the corner, out of sight, listening. Something about being the oldest child made me feel entitled to know more than my brothers. This was a feeling that was reinforced by my mother confiding in me when she needed a friend. Once we purchased the lot in Charleswood, we would all pile into the car to go look at our land. There were no seat belts, 2 adults in the front and us kids in the back seat, punching, hanging out the window. It was spacious. Those big old cars were spacious. My brother was a toddler. I was 13, and my other brother Gordon was 11, and there was a 9-year-old Murray. None of us wanted to be doing this, believe me. But as the oldest child and the temperature taker of my parents' relationship, I knew these visits to our land brought them together. I knew being landowners, homeowners, was important to them both. I had been listening to them talk about it most of my life. Just a short poem. Tell me again. Tell me again about the days before buffalo bones became china, about the days when rivers were roadways. Tell me again about the days before the white man's time-keeping ways. I'm trying to give a few little snippets from here and there. So this comes from a chapter called A Fresh Start. One door closes, another opens. And every chapter begins with an epigraph, and this one is from Leslie Marmon Silko's book titled Ceremony. The old instinct has always been to gather the feelings and opinions about trauma that were scattered through this village, to gather them like willow twigs and tie them into a single prayer bundle that would bring peace to all of them. But now the feelings were twisted, tangled roots, and all the names for the source of this growth were buried, out of reach. There would be no peace, and the people would have no rest until the entanglement had been unwound to the source. So at this point in the book, I'm a 1.5 years sober, enrolled at the Maple Ridge Treatment Center, and not because I want to drink, but because I actually am anxious all the time, and I really would rather die. It's 1988. I have made a new friend. She who saved me is a fiery black woman who speaks her mind. She has seen the way I do my hair and makeup every day and all those matching tracksuits. My second week there at breakfast, she reaches across the table, holds my hand, and says, "You do know you're in treatment, don't you?" She can see right through me, wants to help me. The mixed message queen that I am is wanting to look good while wanting to die, while hunting men, while being the most spiritual person in the room. She has my number. We become friends, both of us with difficult childhoods and a connection to Winnipeg. Years later, I name my son after her grandmother, Jessie Lane. So now we're into the chapter called Rebirth. We all come from somewhere. And the epigraph is from Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with the Wolves. It was my Bible at one time. In it she says, if a woman has a collapsing mother, she must refuse to become one herself. The first time I met you, I was lying on the couch of VJ, a healer specializing in a practice called rebirthing. For months now, she has been taking me back to my own birth. Sometimes we do this in water to make it easier for me to enter the spaces where I began. Together, we visit my mother's womb, a time before words. In those moments, all that exists is water and the drumbeat of my mother's heart. Every visit, Vijay asks me to recall my descent down the birth canal. Some days I resist the best way I know how. I escape into my mind, the wordless place of meditation. When she notices this has happened, she asks me to change position, to get on all fours. I'm to pump up and down, breathe deeply. I don't like this. I prefer the drifting. Then one day, while floating on her couch, there you were, touching my face as a blind person reads Braille. My face, a map you followed. Your hands I now know. I could feel your spirit, the lightness of you, as you introduced yourself to me. That was my son. So this is a poem called Umbilical, and it has a couple of sections, so I'll just put my finger up for the different sections. Umbilical 1. A navel string connecting us, delivering sustenance until shock of light awakens me. Doctors, nurses in masks, surround sound words delivered. It's a girl. Liquid born, I linger on the edge of what I know about my mother, the way she held me within her womb. I have wondered, did she want me? I do recall her saying the best days of my life were the days my children were born. Tied to us, she could not leave. 4. Firstborn, the only girl, I held potential. Egg-filled promises of love delivered faulty fetuses until one managed to hold on. So essentially, this is a book about the layering of grief. I didn't even realize till it was over that it's a book about survivor's guilt and the confusion, I knew this part, that comes when you don't know where you come from. It begins with the loss of my mother and how her death made me a seeker. It's about intergenerational trauma and reconciliation, my reconciliation. So I'll just end with 2 small poems. This one was inspired when I was reading Jean Tallé's book, The Northwest is Our Mother, and I started to understand who I came from, like how strong they were, and I had such a sense of pride suddenly that I'd never felt before, so I'm very grateful to her for this. It's called Born of Water. Born of water, meant to float, I sink until I rise to the big sky songs of my people, traveling rivers, strong arms paddling 1 stroke per second. My ancestors' canoes carried them north, where a daughter was born. The mixing of blood continued until I, born of water, give thanks, hold my hands up to the big sky. Rolling back west, I kneel before the mountains, sit by an ocean of words, my place uncertain, until I, born of water, hear the songs of the Métis voyageurs paddling 1 stroke per second. And they would do that for 12 hours a day. Not straight through, I'm sure they have little breaks, but they would do that for very long periods of time. No wonder I was so muscly. You know, when you go to get weighed at the fair and they try to guess your weight, and if they can never guess mine because I'm so muscly. Tumbling. There are rocks in my pocket, 1 for each death. The first rocks by ancestors whispering thin, easily airborne, skipping over waters of the past. These brought comfort, became touchstones, but then came the drowning. My brother, 16, now a river rock made smooth by loss that's next to the others. 4 years later, a bullet. My brother, 18, his rock marked by mushrooming metal, leaving a hole in him, in me. Before long, another rock, this one larger as it was mother. Aunties, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers followed. For so long, I carried the dead. Afraid to let them go, I brought them everywhere. Others could not see the rocks in my pockets. They could not hear the tumbling, did not feel the beat from the rubbing against one another, feel the heat. every rock heavier than the last, harder to carry. Yet together we all walked, losses rubbing up against one another, pressing on my thighs, until falling open seams stretched, emptying my pockets. I've been carrying the dead my whole life. I had to let them go.